Captain Smith is seen just 10 months earlier on the occasion of the maiden voyage of the Olympic, which he also commanded. He was just 61 years of age and had a distinguished career. He's seen dressed in his summer whites. As White Star's most senior captain, he was reputedly the highest paid on the North Atlantic run. News began to spread around the world about the liner's sinking, and naturally many people crowded around the White Star Line offices in New York, London and Southampton, anxiously awaiting reports. These scenes are of the offices in Lower Broadway, New York, and whilst an employee attends to the cleanliness of the building, relatives desperately wait for news of loved ones. Many Americans were on board the ship that night. Many would not return to their beloved country alive. The saviour in all this tragedy was the little Cunard liner Carpathia, which was on its way from Halifax to the Mediterranean at the time. Itself trapped in the ice floes off Newfoundland, the 13,000-ton ship risked all to get to the scene of the disaster. Altogether, the Carpathia rescued 705 passengers and crew from the Titanic's lifeboats as dawn broke on April the 15th. It took 4.5 hours to get everyone on board for the 3-day journey to New York. Ironically, the Cunard Line and the White Star Line merged a few years later. The Carpathia was sadly lost during the Second World War on active service. As the rescue ship steamed to New York, members of the press assembled to catch every storyline they could get. A certain amount of checkbook journalism, without doubt, took place. The Mary Scully was commandeered to meet the Carpathia off Long Island. The world was waiting for the real story, as up to now it was not clear how many had survived. Once the Carpathia had docked, the real scale of the disaster unfolded. Over 1,500 had gone down with the Titanic, including its captain and designer. The rescue ship attracted a good deal of attention that day. As well as the 705 extra passengers, it had over 700 passengers who had to contend with a journey back to America.
Thought I'd better go and have a look under the bench in the shed. So I got on my hands and knees, all in the dust and that. I had just room for my hand to get an arm to get under on the floor. And I started one end and thought I'd have nothing, and I reached right up the very end, up the corner. I felt something and dragged it out, and it was a film tin. Of course I didn't know if it was a Titanic film or not. So I brought it out here, I got a knife, and ever so rusty, and I eased it all the way around with a knife, so it took me a long while to get it open, but I gradually got it open, and there was a film inside in perfect condition. After 86 years it had been in that film tin. And I took it in the house, and I weren't sure then, but I held a bit up to the light, and I could see we are sinking, and I could see a ship, and I knew it was the Titanic film then, and I found it. After all those years I found it.
We're now going to study these remarkable film sequences in detail. This footage is some of the most important film taken in the Edwardian period. It shows the Titanic at Belfast during the final stages of its fitting out at the Harland and Wolff Yard in the spring of 1912. These shots represent the only moving images ever taken of the liner. Within a few weeks, the ship would be complete, ready for its journey to Southampton and the fateful maiden voyage. Whilst in the fitting-out berth, Titanic had some alterations to her promenade deck. This followed experience with the first ship, Olympic, which had ended service the previous summer. These are the actual ice floes the Titanic tried to negotiate on the night of April the 14th, 1912. Stretching some 60 miles long and 12 miles wide, many other vessels in the vicinity that night were stopped in their tracks by these perilous conditions. For some reason, the Titanic ploughed on at over 20 knots, until one of these huge bergs appeared at the ship's bow. Some eyewitness reports put these icebergs at between 50 and 200 feet high. It only needed one of them to rip through the hull of the White Star liner. "Come quickly, distress," was the emergency message sent from the Titanic by wireless operator Phillips after the collision. This coded radio signal was the forerunner of the SOS, better known today. In fact, Save Our Souls was transmitted by the Titanic that night in a desperate attempt at locating a rescue ship. These desperate calls for help would haunt Captain Smith all the way to his watery grave.